Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this series. It's sort of a narcissistic glossary, a handbook of terminology of everything you need to know to understand narcissism and narcissistic relationships. The goal of this series was to provide clarity on all the various terms you've seen thrown around in the blogs and the videos and the chat rooms and all of these places people talk about these relationships. And by getting this clarity, hopefully also even learning some techniques and ways to work with and around and away from these relationships. Today, we're going to take on the term narcissistic rage. But before we get there, as always, if you're enjoying this content, please hit the bell. That will give you, not only make you a subscriber to this channel, but give you notifications as we post new content. Every time we post new content, and we post a lot of it, that will definitely bring you up to speed on everything you need to know about narcissism and narcissistic relationships. So let's take on a big one. This is a big one. Narcissistic rage. Sometimes people who've been in relationships of any kind with narcissists have told me that they see their narcissist's eyes go black, as though a shadow comes across them and their entire physical presence just changes. Someone, I remember once saying to me, they likened it to watching someone turn into a werewolf. It's a terrifying transformation. It's a rage that comes on like a tsunami. And this rage is completely disproportionate to the situation. It is loud and it is terrifying. It is narcissistic rage. So now let's start by talking about the difference between anger and rage. Anger is a normal human emotion, like sadness or joy. An emotion, anger is an emotion we experience and express at times of watching or observing or experiencing injustice, unfairness, frustration, inequity, disruption, or even surprise. It is an unsettling emotion, and it's an emotion we label as a negative mood state, like sadness. We have all of us have felt angry. And appropriate expressions of anger include a change in the tone and volume of our speech, tears, stepping away from a situation. So if I was angry, I would start talking like this. You'd be clear. Our words become more clipped and abrupt. We often say things that are regrettable, and we can also get quite defensive. We may also experience anger physiologically. We'll have a racing heart. We feel dizzy. We'll find ourselves breathing more rapidly or in a more shallow way. We might even be trembling when we're angry. Anger, as a rule, does not feel good. It is a sign that something is not quite right, not quite good. And all of us, every one of us, has said something we regret when we are angry. In the most graceful of circumstances, we recognize that we are angry, we identify that emotion to other people, and we catch ourselves before we say something that is too hurtful or too devastating. But most of us rarely get it right. We don't always monitor ourselves that carefully. That's anger. That's the nature of anger. Rage, on the other side, is something entirely different. It is often quite sudden, disproportionate to the stimulus, and it's accompanied by behaviors that are very unsettling for those who are witness to them and who are in the presence of them. These rage behaviors can include screaming, very, very inappropriate, obscene language, typically and cruelly targeted at another person. It may even escalate to breaking objects, upending items like, upending furniture, damaging the environment, for example, punching a fist through a wall, breaking windows, or even escalating to person-on-person physical violence. A person at a time of rage may almost look like they're possessed, as though no one can get through to them. And if you do try to speak to a person who is in a state of acute rage, they will likely get more agitated, and confronting them may actually put you at greater risk. And perhaps in only the most rare of circumstances could rage at that level ever seem justified. I mean, listen, as a mother, I could say maybe, for example, if someone tries to harm you or really harm your child, you would rage at them. But outside of literal harm to you physically or someone close to you, rage does not fly as an acceptable emotion or show of emotion. So then, we know what anger is, we know what rage is. What is narcissistic rage? It is the rapid, amped up rage that anyone who has ever been in a relationship of any kind with a narcissist has witnessed. It is a terrifying, grown-up tantrum. If you have ever witnessed a 3-year-old throwing a tantrum over not, I don't know, being allowed to have a few more minutes at the park, you get it. It actually sort of charming in a 3-year-old, but it looks terrifying and ridiculous in a 40-year-old man or a 45-year-old woman. Narcissistic rage gets set off by a narcissistic injury, or something we could term an ego injury. So the things that set off this big, scary, volcanic narcissistic rage can actually often be quite trivial. How dare she didn't call me back? What do you mean the receptionist called in sick? The flight is delayed? I am going to miss the concert. What do you mean you didn't like the restaurant I picked out? I mean, as I was even putting that list together, I'm like, what are the minor things I've heard people tell me their partners raged at? And we're talking rage. Because the things that set them off, that set narcissistic individuals off, are so trivial, we are often astonished at the level of rage. It's not the kind of anger situation I talked about before. It's not like someone threatened their life or tried to abduct their child. Basically, they're disappointed because they didn't get the proverbial few more minutes at the park. Basically, though, narcissists show their narcissistic rage when someone hurts their fragile feelings. Its narcissistic rage is often a relatively early red flag you see in a narcissistic relationship that people choose to ignore. And you must promise me after this video you will never ignore it again. The hypersensitivity of the narcissist is the thing that shows up earliest in a narcissistic relationship. You're surprised that someone so charming, maybe even so arrogant, so sure of themselves, can be so sensitive when things don't go their way or someone doesn't say exactly what it is they want. At first, you may make excuses for them. Oh, they had a bad day, they've had whatever, they're just getting to know me. But when that trigger happens for them, it's actually really terrifying to witness it. Narcissistic rage is the genie you can never put back in the bottle. It often fuels the fear that keeps these relationships together. People become so scared of the narcissistic rage that they become afraid of communicating with the narcissist. They never want to let the narcissist know about things that, I don't know, that would be potentially disappointing. Nobody really wants to be the messenger with the narcissist in case the news is bad or not what they want to hear. And then people become afraid of the rage the narcissist will show if you've decided, for example, you've had it with all their shows of anger and you decide you want out. Their rage almost becomes like a prison of sorts. And people can spend a lifetime appeasing a narcissist just to avoid their rage. It is the same as allowing a 3-year-old child to eat cookies for dinner and set their own bedtime because you're afraid of their tantrums. Here's the difference. With that 3-year-old, it's just going to get noisy. With a narcissist, if you keep enabling their tantrums, it will destroy your life. Now, many of you grew up with narcissistic parents, and you saw firsthand that narcissistic rage as a child. Parents, for example, that would explode at the dinner table because you didn't pass the salt the right way, or because you didn't make your bed, they completely rage at you, or because you didn't say exactly what they wanted to hear, or behave exactly the right way in front of their friends, or they showed narcissistic rage, maybe not directly at you, but you saw it happen constantly to your other parent. Children who grow up in environments where there's this kind of rage will often report a whole range of symptoms going into adulthood, including things like anxiety, hypervigilance, which is sort of always being on edge and always monitoring the environment for threats, fear of conflict, avoidance, and frankly, fear of their own anger. For people who grow up with narcissistic rage, anger becomes a trigger throughout their adulthood. And for a person with a narcissistic parent who goes on, when they become adults, to choose a narcissistic partner, they might find themselves again governed by someone's rage. It can be a horrific playbook of an unsettled childhood that was marked by these shows of rage. And you better believe that narcissistic rage is a major feature that we see in toxic workplaces. Toxic workplaces characterized by narcissistic and tyrannical leaders and bosses and managers and even colleagues. These are the bosses who are verbally abusive, the ones who throw loud tantrums if they're not getting the workplace results or the workplace profits that they want, who publicly demean their staff in front of each other or even in front of clients. It is only in recent years that we are seeing a tiny bit of legal protection against these workplace tyrants. But by and large, these folks get away with their rage, and they keep entire workplaces hostage out of fear. They actually do become very clever too, though, about ensuring that they manifest their rage in ways that make it harder to shut them down. They will rage at the rank and file employees, but not in front of the big bosses. And in smaller businesses where there may not be the protection, for example, of a human resource department, and there may be few witnesses to a narcissistically rageful boss, there actually can be very little protection for the really unfortunate workers who get stuck in these situations working with someone narcissistic. Many narcissistic bosses manage to be serial offenders, and they get away with it through clever things like non-disclosure agreements, settlements that require any form of non-disclosure. Basically, you can't talk about what happened. Or it may even be the employees, your colleagues, that show the rage. Again, these employees, these narcissistic employees, can be very clever at doing things like threatening lawsuits and using other manipulative techniques towards others in the workplace and to the workplace itself. As such, from a risk management perspective, some employers might actually end up trying to appease the narcissistically rageful and manipulative employee to avoid the complex challenges and costs and potential embarrassments of a lawsuit. And in that way, the staff in companies that have cultures of narcissistic rage, in the end, become the sacrificial lambs because the system enables the narcissists. So, why do narcissists have this experience of narcissistic rage? It's a tantrum, grown-up style. Short answer, they do this because they didn't get their way. Their fragile egos mean that they have absolutely no apparatus for managing any kind of disappointment or criticism or feedback or other negative emotions like sadness. Now, disappointment is particularly challenging for them. They are not able to handle hearing the word no, or just simply not having things go their way. They are not able to cope with getting a result other than the result they wanted. They just can't get their head around that. And this all goes back to that idea we talk about, that narcissists are not able to regulate their emotions in a healthy way. They cannot regulate any kind of negative emotion, including sadness. So instead of expressing emotions appropriately, so for example, appropriate shows of emotion might be crying, talking it out, taking responsibility, thinking about it differently, or recognizing that sometimes in life, stuff doesn't go the way we want. There's a moment of grief and then acceptance. Instead of doing that, they fly into a colossal rage. The psychological agony of the pain to their fragile ego, to their core insecurity, is more painful than they can manage or articulate. And so they cannot regulate their reactions. As a result, they express it as rage. And in addition, because they are unable to take responsibility for their behavior or to be self-reflective about their contribution to a given situation. So let's say in the workplace, it would be something like, for example, they might say, maybe we didn't do well with sales this quarter because I treated the sales staff badly, or I didn't communicate clearly. Instead, they blame the sales staff for being lazy, and they express that blame through rage. If the sales staff didn't make their totals, then that means the narcissist may not get their validation. Narcissistic rage is, in one word, unacceptable. It's that simple. And yet, so many people enable it. They enable narcissistic rage in their families. They enable it in their close relationships. They enable it in their workplaces. They either are so afraid of confronting it, or they take the out of, that's just how he is. His bark is worse than his bite. And just like any bad behavior, without any consequences, it will never stop. And very few people feel up to the task of giving them consequences. So that also begs the question, what does narcissistic rage do to us? It takes a massive toll on our health. It is horribly stressful, and people who are consistently exposed to this kind of rage may experience a whole range of stress-related complications, such as drops and dysfunction in their immune functioning, making it more likely that they'll get sick, headaches, muscle aches, exacerbation of existing health problems, problems with sleep, problems with concentration, changes in appetite, and a whole range of psychological issues, including anxiety, fear, rumination, avoidance, hypervigilance, sadness, depression, helplessness, hopelessness, powerlessness, and even isolation and avoidance of other people. You become so fearful of their rage that you get paralyzed and you get stuck. Now, at some level, narcissists do recognize that their rage gives them power. And they also don't care that other people are hurt by their rage. After they have one of their meltdowns, one of their narcissistic rage tantrums, and their tension has been released, they may actually see the fear on the face of other people because of their rage. And instead of apologizing to the other people, they will rationalize their episodes of rage and say, don't take me so seriously when I'm like that. I just need to let out some steam, which feels a little gaslighty. Basically, they have no empathy for the pain that they cause other people. I mean, to give you kind of a gross example, it's as though they just vomited all over the place. They feel better now that they got it out. And now they expect other people to clean up the mess. Now, many people wonder if it is inevitable that narcissistic rage would escalate to violence. Now, keep in mind that violence means lots of things. Violence isn't just someone hitting you. Violence also includes things like throwing objects, punching walls, breaking windows, slamming doors, pushing, or God forbid, kicking a pet, driving in a manner that's dangerous. These are all things that qualify as violence. And it's also worth noting how often narcissists will use their size to express their rage. They'll draw to their full height and tower over you if you are sitting down, using their gestures in an intimidating manner, banging their fist on something to make noise. And once these signs of rage start showing, once the rage hits that high enough point, person-to-person violence can happen, even if it hasn't happened yet. One of the most unsettling issues I observe is the number of people who excuse narcissists for their rage. And their excuse is, but he never or she never hit me. I promise you this, it's just a matter of time. Narcissistic rage, as I've said, is unacceptable, and it is also scary. Many people feel too scared to get themselves away from it. If this is a new relationship, don't buy into their excuses for why they say they're rageful, because they're going to have a whole lot of them. They're going to give you excuses like they had a tough childhood. They had to watch lots of rage when they were growing up. They will give excuses including early trauma. And you know what? It's not untrue. These things may be contributing to it. Be sad for them, be compassionate to them, and get out. You're not their therapist. You're not the one who's going to turn this around for them. You've got to protect you. To me, narcissistic rage is one of the most textbook and one of the most unsettling elements of the narcissistic relationship. If you see it early in a narcissistic relationship, heed it as the big, fat, red neon alarm it is. If you grew up with it, please consider seeking out therapy to work it through, because it can be quite traumatic, and recognize that none of us are responsible for the narcissist's rage. That's their story to sort out. Let's stop making it our own. We must stop personalizing their rage and taking responsibility for it. Whether it's the fact that you burned dinner, or a few minutes late to a meeting because you had a flat tire, you didn't make the sales quota, or you bought the wrong gift for their mother. None of those things ever would qualify for anything close to rage. Our tendency is to blame ourselves. Stop personalizing and put the responsibility for that behavior where it is, and heed it as a wake-up call. If the rage is that unsettling, it will only tend to escalate. And because they often come down off of their rage episodes because they got their tension out, and you're like, well, maybe they got it. Oh no, they didn't get it. They don't understand it. What they do understand is, I got my rage out and this person is still standing there, so I can get away with this again. It's up to you whether you want to be a receptacle for that person's rage, because their rage is a heck of a lot less healthy for you than it is for them. I hope this video has explained the concept, the terrifying concept of narcissistic rage. And as always, if you're enjoying this content, please subscribe to this channel, hit that bell, become part of this amazing community. And if you have ideas of terms I might have missed in this series, drop them down in the comments. If we don't get into it, the beauty of this series is you get surprised every day with the next term. But if we don't get to it, I promise you, I'll give you a 22nd, 23rd, 24th day until we get through all these words. Thanks again.